Following video is all about Chapter 4A, taking control of your finances. So our lesson objectives in this section are going to be to understand and calculate monthly net cash flow, and then also calculate monthly interest rates on a loan based on an annual rate. So Chapter 4 is all about financial mathematics. We go into a great deal in financial mathematics, but in the first section, we're mainly just going to be focusing on like your personal finances, how much money you make, how much money you spend, how does that affect the money you have long term. And then, of course, if you're borrowing money, oftentimes a bank is willing to give you information about the interest rates annually. We want to look at how does that affect like your monthly payment to them, how are they making money off of you, things like that. And again, like I said, it's just the early introduction to these concepts. As we get farther into the power of compounding and monthly mortgages, things like that, we're going to have much more information at our fingertips in terms of how do we manage our finances and what things do we need to consider when we want to borrow money. All of these will lead to a culminating assignment at the end that's going to have you buying your own home. Let's talk about cash flow real quick. Cash flow can be thought of as the difference between your monthly income and your monthly expenses. In other words, take the amount of money that you make, subtract the amount of money that you spend, and what's left over is known as your cash flow. Of course, if cash flow is positive, then you're making more money than you're spending. If cash flow is negative, then you are spending more money than you are making. Cash flow can be measured in lots of different periods of time. For this section, we're going to be interested particularly in calculating your cash flow for 1 month. Let's start with example 1. It says expenses and incomes of an individual are given below. We want to find the net monthly cash flow. So we're going to take all the income, we're going to add that up. We're going to take all the expenses, we're going to add that up. And then we will subtract the income minus the expenses to get the monthly cash flow. Now notice that our goal in here is to make everything monthly, and a lot of the information we were given were not given to us by month. For example, in income, we have the part-time job paying us per month, but the scholarship is broken out per year. So we're going to need to do some unit conversion there in order to get this value in monthly. So that's what our first goal is going to be for this problem. On your own, please turn all of these different income and expense amounts into a monthly amount. Some of them are already in monthly, so you don't have to do anything with those. For the part-time job, we get $1,000 per month. For the scholarship, it's $2,400 a year. And so because there are 12 months in a year, we're going to take our $2,400. We'll divide 12, and we get $200. So it turns out that our total monthly income is going to be $1,200. Now we're going to calculate the expenses, and we'll subtract $1,200 minus whatever we get. So we'll start with tuition. Tuition is given to us at $5,400 twice a year. Twice per year means every 6 months. So we're going to take our $5,400 and we're going to divide it by 6. And that tells us that we need to spend $900 a month on tuition. Our cell phone bill is $80 a month. Food is $50 per week. Now, there's not a straight relationship between weeks and months, so I'll usually give you some relationship here. It says assume 1 month is 4 weeks, and so that's what we're going to be looking at here. So if they give us something that's weekly, we will take it, we'll multiply it by 4 in order to find its monthly value. So it turns out that this person spends $200 a month on groceries. It says gas every 2 weeks. We were mentioning that 1 month is 4 weeks. So this person is going to spend $80 a month on gas. And then lastly, $30 per month on incidentals. So we're going to add all that up. And we get that the expenses for this person is $1,290. And so we can see that they spend more money than they make, and so our cash flow should be negative. and we subtract 1,200 minus 1,290, we get the total cash flow for this person to be negative $90 a month. So obviously cash flow leads us to the idea of budgeting, right? The more we know about our monthly cash flow, the better that we can plan for certain events that we may not expect that could be costly, like a birthday party or an injury or illness or something. It also gives us an idea of whether or not we need to change some of our spending habits or change some of the way that we get income, right? Do we need an extra job to cover all of our bills? Is there a way that we can cut back on some of our entertainment so that we can make sure that we stay within our budget and our cash flow isn't negative? So these are the kinds of things that cash flow leads us to, right? Understanding your spending as it relates to all the other categories is really important, right? The goal here is to make sure that you know how your money should be distributed. If somebody tells you, don't spend more than 30% of your money on your housing, right? Now you have an idea of a range of money that you should be, looking for, a range of house value that you should be looking for, as opposed to just saying, oh, I make $2,000 a month, I can spend, I don't know, $1,500 a month on a house. Technically you kind of can, but what's going to happen is you're sacrificing in so many other places that your budget isn't going to make sense. And so that's what this whole section's about. So the next example says, your car registration is due next year. You estimate your registration will be $220. That sounds familiar. How much should you set aside each month? Well, you have 12 months in order to do this for, and you know your registration is going to be $220. So let's say you're going to take your $220 and you're going to divide it out by 12 months. When we do that, we get about $18.33 per month. And that doesn't sound like a lot. In fact, it's not really, right? Under $20 a month to take care of your car registration for the year. But keep in mind that when you make your cash flow now, this is something that you're going to have every single month. So you can include it in your monthly cash flow at this point, instead of not even considering it and ignoring it for 11 months. And then when the 12th month comes up thinking, oh man, how am I going to come up with $220 right now? My cash flow is already close to zero. I can't afford this. So these are the kinds of things that you want to think about. Are you thinking about your registration that's due in September? Are you thinking about it in January? Probably not. But if you put aside a little bit starting in January or starting the following October, November, chances are you're going to be in a lot better shape when September comes around. The next example wants you to compute the total cost per year for the following pair of expenses, and then we want to complete this sentence. The first set of expenses is what percent of the second set of expenses. So it says Maria spends $5.25 a week on coffee, and then spends $125 per month on food. Let's start with that. We got coffee, and we got food. Coffee, we said, was $5.25 per every week. Food, we said, was $125 every month. So we want to turn these into costs per year, which means we're going to have to make a conversion from weeks to years and from months to years. So let's start with coffee. We go with $5.25 per week, and we multiply. We know that 1 year is 52 weeks. Our week unit cancels out. And 525 times 52 gives us $273 per year on coffee. And then we go to food. For food, we have $125 every month. We know there are 12 months in 1 year. Our month units would cancel out. We multiply $125 times 12, and it turns out Maria spends $1,500 a year on food. So now we have the annual values for each one of these. The last part said on an annual basis, the money spent on coffee is what percent of the money spent on food. That's just making a fraction where coffee goes on top and food goes on bottom. We're going to take 273 over 1,500, and we'll express that as a percentage. 273 over 1,500 gives us 0.182. And again, don't forget to express that as a percentage, 18.2%. So it turns out Maria spends 18.2% of her food a week on coffee. Or I guess if these are separate expenses, she spends the portion of her coffee spent on, or portion of her money spent on coffee is 18.2% of the portion of money she spends on food. There we go. The next example just says the rule of thumb is to spend no more than 30% of your monthly gross income on housing. So we mentioned this before. This is a good rule of thumb to keep in mind, particularly when we start talking about the big project later on, when you have to go and buy a home. And given some certain situation, you'll want to look at that 30% rule to see what you can afford. It says an individual whose grossly month income is $3,200 spends $1,300 on housing. Are they living by this rule of thumb? So that's just to take your $3,200 that you make monthly and to multiply it by that 30%. Remember that 30% is a decimal, it's 0.30. When we run through this, a person that makes $3,200 a month by rule of thumb should be spending, I'll just put here rule of thumb. A person who makes this much should be spending about $960 a month on their housing. This person, though, is spending a lot more than that. They're spending $1,300 a month on housing. So are they living by this rule of thumb? I would say no. Of course, this rule of thumb isn't a hard and fast rule. It's certainly a lot different if you're living, for example, in San Francisco than you are if you're living in rural Ohio, right? So the amount of money that you spend on housing is going to vary depending on where you live. But in terms of your budget, if you're sticking around that 30% value, you're not going to get yourself in a situation where you're too overwhelmed financially. So yeah, you could say, oh, well, housing's really expensive here. That's why I have to pay $1,300. Well, if that's the case, then maybe you need to find a job that's earning you a little bit more money so you can stay within that rule. Example 4 just gives us a nice chart over here. It shows us that a family has a 45-year-old wage earner, he or she makes $46,000 a year, and they spend $1,500 a month on housing. And so we can look at this chart. We can see that the second line for 35 to 64 tells us that they should be spending about 32.1% on housing, according to the chart. Again, that can be found. That can be found here. Oops. And so there's our 32.1%. We're basically going to take 32.1% of 46,000. So we'll multiply 46,000 times 32.1% as a decimal is 0.321. And we get $14,766. Now remember, though, that this is annual income. And so this number that we just calculated is your annual housing. This is how much you should spend on housing in a year. If we want to know how much you should spend on housing in a month, we can take that value and divide it by 12 to find out our monthly housing recommended spending amount. So I take it, I divide it by 12, and I got $1,203.50 for this person. That's their monthly recommended housing cost. However, it tells us that they're spending $1,500 a month on housing. So once again, we have somebody living beyond their means, right? By about $300 a month. They should either, get a roommate, find another way to earn an extra $300 a month towards their housing, or maybe their annual household income needs to change in a positive way. Maybe they needed to find a less expensive house. Lastly, we go to monthly interest payments. This is just the first conversation of many that we're going to have about interest payments. The book really talks about simple interest in the beginning. Simple interest really doesn't have very many good applications in real life because that's not how interest works. Interest works compounded upon itself unless you are taking that money out immediately after it compounds. So there's not a whole lot of good stuff in this section, but there is some important things to look at. Like I mentioned earlier, banks like to give you interest rates as annual percentages, but a lot of what you do financially to calculate your bills is to look at things monthly. So that's what we're going to look at in these last examples. We want to look at the annual percentage, divide it by 12 to find out what that monthly percentage is, and then we're going to apply our part percent whole triangle that we had in the past when we did chapter 3 so that we can figure out what pieces we need. Look at this example. It says you maintain an average balance of $1,200 on your credit card, which carries a 24% annual interest rate. Calculate your monthly interest payment. So let's start with the 24% annual interest rate. So as we've seen a bunch in this section, we have to go from annual to monthly quite often, and to do that, we're dividing by 12. And so if something earns 24% interest in a year, we can divide this by 12, and we could say that it earns 2% interest monthly. That's how your credit card payment is calculated. If you look on the back of your credit card application, or you look in the terms and conditions of your loan or your credit card, usually it gives you the APR, the APY. There's a difference, but we'll talk about those later. But what it is it's your annual percentage rate, basically, APR. That's often the one that they give you. So the annual percentage rate doesn't necessarily tell you how much you're paying each month because you got to divide it out by 12 to find out what your monthly interest is. And then once you find out what your monthly interest rate is, then it depends on how much money you owe on your card. So now that we know that that this credit card earns 2% interest monthly, we also need to find out now what's 2% of $120. So if we carry a balance of $120 on our card, at the end of the month, the bank is going to charge us 2%, or multiplying by 0.02, 2% monthly interest. And so when we multiply those together, it turns out that we get $2.40. So this is your monthly interest payment, or this is the extra money that you're going to have to pay on your card every month. And again, if you continue to hold a $120 balance on your credit card, maybe you buy something and then you make the payment on your credit card so that you're still back at $120, you're going to continue to accrue $2.40 extra a month on this card. Okay. Our last example says, Vic bought a new TV for the big game for $1,800. He makes a down payment of $700 and finances the remaining balance through his store. Unfortunately, Vic was unable to make the first payment and now pays 3% interest per month. What's Vic's monthly interest payment? Okay, well, he originally bought the TV for $1,800, but he didn't borrow all $1,800 because of this idea of the down payment, right? The down payment is something that you're making towards what you're borrowing so that you don't have to borrow as much money, right? So he went in there, he saw this TV he loved. He's like, $1,800. I don't have $1,800, but I do have $700. And the store was like, okay, pay us your $700. And now you owe us $1,100 for the TV, and you're going to borrow that from us. And so it says Vic was unable to make his first payment, and he now pays 3% interest per month. So now we want to know, okay, he's got $1,100 that he owes, but in addition to that $1,100, he has to pay 3% extra every month. This is because he forgot to make his payment. So we're going to take 3% of $1,100. It turns out it is $33. And so as a penalty, Vic is going to have to pay $33 for this first month in addition to his monthly payment. Now, over time, this balance is going to go down, right? Vic isn't always going to owe $1,100. We assume Vic's able to make payments over time, and maybe this $1,100 trims down to $1,000, and then maybe $800, and then maybe $600, and so on. As that number goes down, the percent that you are taking doesn't change, but the amount that you are accruing in interest does. And so the banks love to charge interest, particularly in the beginning of a loan when there's a lot of money owed, because they're going to get a lot back. If Vic only owed maybe $100 on this loan, 3% of that's only maybe $3.30. So the bank isn't making nearly as much when there isn't a large balance due. That's it for this first section. Hope you enjoyed. Be on the lookout for the next two.